Chapter 8, which is about the village stores and a party in the forest. The whole of the next day they travelled through the wood, straight towards Moomin Valley, and Snufkin went in front playing his mouth organ to keep their spirits up. At about 5 o'clock in the afternoon they came to a little path which had a big notice beside it, with an arrow saying, "Dancing tonight, this way, village stores."
"Oh, I want to dance. Couldn't we dance?"
cried the Snork Maiden, clapping her paws.
"I haven't been dancing for ages and ages."
"We haven't time for that sort of thing now," said the Snork.
"Perhaps we could buy some lemonade at that village stores," said Sniff. "I'm so thirsty."
"Anyway, the path goes in exactly our direction," said Moomin Troll. "We could just have a look at the dancing as we go by," suggested Snufkin. The Snork sighed. "Oh, you're quite hopeless, all of you," he said with a resigned air. It was a funny little path, winding here and there, dashing off in different directions, and sometimes even tying a knot in itself from sheer joy. You don't get tired of a path like that, and I'm not sure that it doesn't get you home quicker in the end. Snufkin cut a flagpole and hoisted his precious flag once again. Sniff carried it while Snufkin played, and the Snork Maiden frisked in and out between the trees, picking flowers to match whatever mood she happened to be in, and putting them behind her ears.
"Tell me some more about your valley," she said to Moomin Troll.
"Oh, it's the most wonderful valley in the whole world," he answered. "There are blue trees with pears growing on them, and chatterfinches sing from morning till night. And there are plenty of silver poplars, which are wonderful for climbing. I thought of building a house for myself in one of them. Then at night the moon is reflected in the river, which tinkles over the rocks with a sound like broken glass. And Papa has built a bridge that is wide enough for a wheelbarrow."
"Must you be so poetic?" said Sniff. "When we were in the valley, you only talked about how wonderful other places were."
"Oh, that was different," said Moomin Troll.
"Oh, but it's true,"
said Snufkin. "We're all like that. You must go on a long journey before you can really find out how wonderful home is."
"Where's your home, then?"
asked the Snork Maiden. "Nowhere," said Snufkin a little sadly. "Or everywhere. It depends on how you look at it." "Haven't you got a mother?" asked Moomin Troll, looking very sorry for him. "I don't know," said Snufkin. "They tell me I was found in a basket."
"Like Moses,"
said Sniff. "I like the story about Moses," said the Snork, "but I think his mother could have found a better way of saving him, don't you? The crocodiles might have eaten him up."
"They nearly ate us up,"
said Sniff.
"Moses' mother could have hidden him in a box with air holes," said the Snork Maiden. "That would have kept the crocodiles out." "Once we tried to make a diving helmet with an air tube," said Sniff, "but we could never get it really watertight. Once when Moomin Troll was diving, he swallowed some water and nearly choked. It was funny." "Oh," exclaimed the Snork Maiden in horror, "I think it must have been awful."
As they were wandering along and talking like this, they suddenly came in sight of the village stores. Sniff gave a shout and waved the flag over his head, and they all hurried excitedly up the path. It was a really good village stores. The garden had all the flowers you can think of planted in neat rows, and the house was white with grass growing on the roof. In front was a kind of sundial, but instead of telling the time, it held a big silver ball like a looking-glass. And in this the house and garden were reflected. There were signs and posters for soap and toothpaste and chewing gum, and under the window grew huge yellow and green pumpkins. Moomin Troll went up the steps and opened the door, which set a little bell tinkling over his head. They trooped in, one after another, all except the Snork Maiden, who stayed out in the garden admiring herself in the silver ball. Behind the counter sat an old lady with little bright eyes like a mouse and white hair.
"Aha!" she said.
"What a lot of children! And what can I do for you, my dears?"
"Lemonade, please, Mum," said Sniff.
"Green, if you've got it."
"Have you an exercise book with lines 1 inch apart?" asked the Snork, who intended to write down everything that ought to be done when a comet is going to hit the earth.
"Certainly," said the old lady. "Would you like a blue one?"
"Well, I'd prefer another colour," said the Snork, because blue exercise books reminded him of school.
"I really need a new pair of trousers," said Snufkin, "but they needn't be too new. I like trousers that have stretched to me own shape."
"Yes, of course,"
said the old lady, climbing up a ladder and hucking a pair of trousers down from the roof.
"What about these?"
"But they are so horribly new and clean," said Snufkin sadly. "Haven't you got something older?" The old lady thought for a time.
"These are the oldest trousers I have in stock," she said at last. "And tomorrow they'll be still older, probably dirtier too,"
she added, looking at Snufkin over her glasses. "Oh, well," he said, "I might as well go round the corner and try them on. But I very much doubt if they'll be my shape." And he disappeared into the garden.
"Now, what about you, my dear?"
said the old lady, turning to Moomin Troll, who wriggled with embarrassment, and asked shyly, "Have you got such a thing as a, diamond tiara?"
"A diamond tiara?"
the old lady asked in surprise.
"What are you going to do with that?"
"He wants to give it to the Snork Maiden, of course," squeaked Sniff, who was sitting on the floor drinking green lemonade through a straw.
"He's been quite dotty since he met that girl."
"It's not dotty at all to give jewellery to a girl," said the old lady severely.
"You're too young to understand, but as a matter of fact, a jewel is the only correct present for a lady."
"Oh," said Sniff, and buried his nose in the lemonade. The old lady searched all her shelves, but there was no tiara. "Perhaps there's one under the counter," suggested Moomin Troll. The old lady had a look.
"No,"
she said sadly.
"Not there either. Fancy not having a single tiara. But perhaps a little pair of Snork mittens would do instead."
"I'm not quite sure," said Moomin Troll, looking very worried. At that moment the door-bell tinkled, and the Snork Maiden herself came into the shop.
"Good afternoon,"
she said.
"What a beautiful looking glass you have out there in the garden. Since I lost my pocket one, I've had to look at myself in puddles, and you look so funny in puddles."
The old lady winked at Moomin Troll, took something from a shelf, and passed it to him under the counter. Moomin Troll glanced down. It was a little round looking-glass with a silver rim, and on the back was a red rose studded with rubies. He was very pleased, and winked back at the old lady. The Snork Maiden hadn't noticed anything.
"Have you any medals, ma'am?" she asked. "Any what, my dear?" said the old lady. "Medals," said the Snork Maiden. "Stars to hang on the chest. Gentlemen like such things." "Oh, yes, of course," said the old lady. "Medals."
And she looked all over the place, on all the shelves and under the counter.
"Haven't you any?"
asked the Snork Maiden, and a tear began to trickle down her nose. The old lady looked most unhappy,
But she suddenly had an idea and climbed up the ladder to the highest shelf, where there was a box of Christmas tree decorations, and amongst these she found a big silver star.
"Look!"
she cried, holding it up.
"Here's a medal for you." "Oh, how beautiful!"
the Snork Maiden burst out. Then she turned to Moomin Troll and said shyly,
"This is for you, Moomin Troll, because you saved me from the poisonous bush."
Moomin Troll was overwhelmed. He knelt down, and the Snork Maiden pinned the star somewhere about his tummy. Moomin Trolls' noses cover up their chests, so you can't very well pin medals there, where it shone with matchless splendour.
"Now you should see how wonderful you look,"
said the Snork Maiden. At this, Moomin Troll brought out the looking-glass that he had been holding behind his back.
"I bought this for you," he said. "Show me how you look in it."
While they were gazing at themselves in the glass and exclaiming, "Oh!" and
"Ah!"
the doorbell tinkled again, and Snufkin came in.
"I think it would be better if the trousers got older here," he said. "They aren't my shape yet."
"Oh dear,"
said the old lady.
"What a pity. But perhaps you'd like a new hat."
However, this idea only filled Snufkin with alarm, and he pulled his old green hat farther down over his ears and said,
"Thank you, but I was just thinking how dangerous it is to load yourself up with belongings."
The Snork had been sitting all this time writing in his exercise book, and now he got to his feet and said,
"One thing to remember when you are escaping from a comet is not to stand about too long in village stores. I suggest, therefore, that we continue our journey. Hurry up and finish your lemonade, Sniff."
Sniff tried to gulp the lot, and of course most of it went on the floor.
"He always does that," said Moomin Troll.
"Shall we go?"
"What does all that come to, please?"
the Snork asked the old lady. She began to count up, and while she was doing so, Moomin Troll suddenly remembered that they hadn't any money with them. None of them even had pockets except Snufkin, and his were always empty. Moomin Troll nudged him, making desperate signs with his eyebrows, and the Snork and his sister looked at each other in horror. Not one of them had a single penny.
"That'll be 1 3/4 pennies for the exercise book, and 3 pennies for the lemonade,"
said the old lady.
"The star is 5 pennies, and the looking-glass is 11, because it has real rubies on the back. That will be 1 shilling, 8 3/4 pennies altogether."
Nobody said anything. The Snork Maiden picked up the looking-glass and laid it on the counter with a sigh. Moomin Troll started unpinning his medal. The Snork wondered if exercise books cost more or less after you had written in them, and Sniff just thought about his lemonade, which was mostly on the floor anyway. The old lady gave a little cough.
"Well now, my children," she said, "there are the old trousers that Snufkin didn't want. They are worth exactly 1 shilling and 8 pence. So you see, one cancels out the other, and you don't really owe me anything at all."
"Is that really so?" asked Moomin Troll doubtfully.
"It's as clear as day, little Moomin Troll," said the old lady. "I'll keep the trousers."
The Snork tried to count it up in his head, but he couldn't, so he wrote it in the exercise book, like this. Exercise book, 1 3/4 pennies. Lemonade, 3 pennies. Medal, 5 pennies. Looking-glass with rubies, 11 pennies. Total, 1 shilling, 8 3/4 pennies. Trousers, 1 shilling, 8 pennies. 1 shilling 8 pennies equals 1 shilling 8 pennies. 3/4 of a penny left over.
"Oh, it's quite right,"
he said in surprise.
"But there's 3/4 of a penny over," said Sniff. "Don't we get that?"
"Don't be mean," said Snufkin. "We'll call it even."
So they thanked the old lady and were just leaving when the Snork Maiden remembered something.
"Can you tell us where the dancing is tonight, please?"
she asked.
"Well," said the old lady, "you just follow the path until you come to it, and nothing begins until the moon gets up."
They had left the village stores some way behind when Moomin Troll stopped and put his hand to his head. "The comet!" he exclaimed. "We must warn the old lady about it, mustn't we? Perhaps she would like to come with us and hide in the cave. Sniff, will you run back and ask her?" Sniff trotted off, and they sat down by the side of the path to wait.
"Can you dance the samba?"
the Snork Maiden asked Moomin Troll. Well, a bit," he answered, "but I like the waltz best." "We've hardly got time for this dance tonight," said the Snork. "Look at the sky." They looked. "It's got bigger," said Snufkin. "Yesterday it was a mere pinhead. Now it's the size of an egg."
"But I'm sure you can do the tango,"
went on the Snork Maiden.
"1 short step to the side and 2 long steps backwards."
It sounds easy," said Moomin Troll. "Sister," said the Snork, "you haven't a serious thought in your head. Can't you ever keep to the point?"
"We began talking about dancing,"
said the Snork Maiden.
"and then suddenly you started talking about the comet, where I'm still talking about dancing."
Then they both slowly began to change colour, but luckily Sniff ran up just then.
"She doesn't want to come with us,"
he said.
"She's going to creep into the cellar when it comes, but she's very grateful and sent us a lollipop each."
"You didn't ask for them by any chance?" asked Moomin Troll suspiciously.
"Wretched wretch!" exclaimed Sniff indignantly. "What an idea! She thought we ought to have them, as she owed us 3/4 of a penny. And after all, that's quite true."
So they went on, sucking their lollipops, while the sun sank behind the trees, shrouded in a grey mist. The moon came up, looking rather green and pale, and the comet shone stranger than ever. It was now nearly as big as the sun, and lit up the whole wood with its strange red light. They found the dance floor in a little clearing, round which thousands of glowworms had kindly festooned themselves. Nearby sat a giant grasshopper with a large mug of beer in his hand, and a fiddle on the grass beside him. "Phew," he said. "It's pretty warm to be playing all the time."
"Who are you playing for?"
asked the Snork Maiden, looking at the empty dance floor. "Oh, the forest creatures from hereabouts," said the grasshopper with a sweep of his arm, and took another drink. "But the silly little things aren't satisfied. They say my music isn't modern enough." Then they realized that the place was swarming with all kinds of strange little people. Even the water spooks who had come up out of the dried-up marshes and forest pools were there, and groups of tree spirits sat gossiping under the birch trees. A tree spirit is a beautiful little creature who lives in a tree trunk, but at night she flies up to the top of the tree to swing in the branches. She isn't usually found in trees that have needles instead of leaves. The Snork Maiden picked up her looking-glass to see if the flower behind her ear looked all right, and Moomin Troll put his medal straight. It was a long time since they had been to a real ball.
"I don't want to offend the grasshopper," whispered Snufkin, "but do you think I could play a little for them on my mouth organ?"
"Why don't you play together?" suggested the Snork. "Teach him that song. All small beasts should have bows in their tails."
"Oh, that's a good idea,"
said Snufkin, and he took the grasshopper behind a bush — it wasn't a poisonous one this time — to teach him the song. After a while a few notes were heard, and then some trills and twiddles. All the small creatures stopped chattering and went down to the clearing to listen. "That sounds modern," they said. "You can dance to that."
"Oh, Mama!"
exclaimed one very small creature, pointing at Moomin Troll's star.
"There's a general!"
Whereupon they all gathered round the travellers with cries of astonishment and admiration.
"How nice and fluffy you are!"
they said to the Snork Maiden, and the tree spirits looked at themselves in the looking-glass with rubies on the back, and the water spooks put their wet autographs in the Snork's exercise book. Then there were sounds from behind the bush, and out came Snufkin and the grasshopper, playing with all their might. There was a dreadful muddle at first, while they all tried to sort each other out, but at last everybody found the person he wanted to dance with, and they started off. The Snork Maiden taught Moomin Troll how to dance the samba, which isn't all that easy if you have very short legs. The Snork danced with an elderly and respectable inhabitant of the marshes, who had seaweed in her hair, and Sniff twirled round with the smallest of the small creatures. Even the midges danced, and every possible kind of creeping thing came out of the forest to have a look. And nobody gave a thought to the comet that was rushing towards them, lighting up the black night with its fierce glow. At about 12 o'clock, a huge barrel of palm wine was rolled out, and everybody got a little birch bark mug to drink out of. Then the glowworms rolled themselves together into a ball in the middle of the glade, and everybody sat round drinking wine and eating sandwiches, which had also been provided.
"Now we should tell a story,"
said Sniff, turning to the smallest of the small creatures.
"Do you know one, little creep?" "Oh, no, really?"
whispered the little creep, who was terribly shy.
"Oh, no. Well, really, perhaps." "Well, out with it then,"
said Sniff.
"There was a wood rat called Poot,"
said the little creep, looking shyly between her paws.
"Well, what happened then?"
prompted Sniff.
"Oh, the story's finished now,"
said the little creep, and burrowed into the moss in confusion. They all roared with laughter, and those who had tails beat them on the ground in appreciation. Then Moomin Troll asked Snufkin for a song. "We'll take the higgledy-piggledy song," he said.
"But that's so sad,"
protested the Snork Maiden. "Well, let's have it anyway," said Moomin Troll, "because it's such a good whistling song." So Snufkin played, and everybody joined in with the refrain. Higgledy-piggledy, path is so wiggly, time is past 4. Almost dead beat, on tired little feet, no friendly door. Higgledy-piggledy, path is so wiggly, time is past 4. Almost dead beat, on tired little feet, no friendly door. The Snork Maiden leant her head on Moomin Troll's shoulder.
"Oh, it's just what has happened to us,"
she sobbed.
"Here we are, almost dead beat, on tired little feet, and we shall never get home."
"Yes, we shall," said Moomin Troll. "Don't cry, and when we get there, Mamma will have dinner ready, and she'll take us in her arms, and think what fun it will be to tell them all about what has happened to us."
"And I shall have a pearl ankle ring,"
said the Snork Maiden, drying her tears.
"And what about a pearl tie-pin for you?"
"Yes," said Moomin Troll, "that would be nice, but then I hardly ever wear a tie." The Snork Maiden couldn't think of an answer to this, so they stopped talking and listened to Snufkin, who was still playing his mouth organ. He played one song after another, until gradually all the little animals and water spooks faded back into the wood. The tree spirits crept into their trees, and the Snork Maiden went to sleep with her looking-glass in her paw. At last the songs were ended, and it was quite still in the glade. The glowworms went out one by one, and very slowly the night crept towards morning.